September 10th, 2021 meeting to order.
We will begin with staff reports. Huh? So we never do it this meeting, we always do it the other one, right? That's the way we always did it. Staff reports. Who we got first? Dana?
Yeah.
Dana?
Oh, live already?
Yep.
Okay. See if we're not paying attention. Hello, everybody. Okay. So, Brian asked me to just give a little bit of an update on the Huntfish PA system, and you know, I think everybody's aware we've had a few issues and a few successes and a few challenges and all those things. So I just thought I would provide everybody with where we are at this point in time, since we did have our license year opener in June, and there's a lot that's been happening since we had that in the middle of June. So definitely some positive things going on. I mean, we're selling licenses. We're selling a lot of licenses, actually. If you look at the sales reports for the end of August, you can see that for general license sales, meaning the base licenses, we're up by about 0.5% over what we were last year. Now, a lot of the different privileges were, you know, down a little, some were way up, so there's a lot of variation, but if you just measure base licenses, we're up about 0.5%, and like I said, that's only through the end of August, so, you know, there's still a lot of room there for change. Some other interesting stats, you know, I asked the crew, what's our increase in internet sales between this year and last year? And what they're telling me is we have increased our internet sales by 68%, which that's a lot. I mean, I know that a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that we did promote the new system a lot for online buyers. So I was actually surprised to see that number. And I know that one of the things that the board was interested in was obviously collecting a lot more email addresses from customers. So we looked at those numbers as well, and we've had a pretty good increase. We've collected about 325,000 more email addresses since we went live with our new system. Now that includes game-only customers, fish-only customers, combined customers, merchandise customers, all of those customers combined adds up to about 325,000 more email licenses. So we're actually at a place where we have about 28% of our customer base we've collected their email address for. So that's, I mean, you know, I feel like that's going to keep increasing the more people go online, because if you go online to buy anything, you must provide us an email address. And at the agent locations, they've been asked to collect if they can, you know, some of them, you know how it is at an agent location, you know, they might not ask it at busy times and things like that. So I think that's a positive thing. Some of the other positive things that we're seeing out of the new system is the customers really have a lot more transparency as it relates to their own profile and their own purchasing, you know, the things that they've purchased over the year and previous years. We've loaded all of their previous history into the system, so it's really a nice one-stop shop for them to be able to go in and you know, buy merchandise, look at their applications that they've applied for. We've been able to put 10 different lotteries in the new system, which we didn't have that ability in the old system. So for the customer to be able to have all that transparency, we feel like that's a very added bonus for them. You know, along with the just the overall more modern experience of the new website and the mobile abilities too, because we have noticed, and I didn't get the percentages for how many buyers we have on the mobile device as opposed to a tablet or as opposed to a desktop computer, but we have seen those numbers increase greatly from customers using their mobile devices to purchase licenses, so that's exciting. You know, the one other nice thing about the new system for us, which it's kind of a behind the scenes thing, but the new system allows a lot more configurability within it, as opposed to, like, for example, if we would have a new permit that we wanted to make available for sale. In the old system, we would have needed to supply a change request to the old vendor, who would have had to assess the cost for that, and then it would take months for them to put it in their schedule. A lot of these things, we have the ability to configure ourselves, so we can just do it, as we need it, and it makes for a timelier and more cost-effective overall system. So those are some of the positive things that we're seeing right now. Like I did say, the lotteries was one of the big things for us, and that was one of the things that NIC was just, I'm not going to say they were dragging their feet, it just was one of those things that kind of kept getting pushed out the further we went closer to go live, and then the closer we got to our license year sale, for the new year, lotteries weren't done, and it was a large scale effort to get the lotteries done, and it was a big relief when we finally were able to say that we were in a good place with those, and we've held almost all the lotteries at this point, so that's very exciting. We were able to do those and post the results back to the customer's profile so they could go right in and see the status of their applications. So that's been a pretty big win for us, although it took a long time to get that win, but it's pretty exciting to get there. Let's see. Oh, one of the big things, the digital licensing. That was one of the things we obviously hoped to have ready for mid-June when we had our new license year begin. There's a dinging behind me I'm hearing. I don't know what that is. Maybe I'm pressing on this laptop. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, we went live actually with digital licenses just this past Wednesday. We have not put the news, well, maybe we did put the news release out yet. I don't think we did yet. No, we're going to wait till Monday, I think, to put the press release out to let customers know that digital licenses and electronic versions of their licenses are available to them. And just to give you an overview of what that means, I know that, we hoped for that to go live in mid-June, and it just didn't happen. We've been working closely with NIC to get that in place. But since we do have it in place, it's really, it's not terrible that we didn't have it ready in June, because even if someone bought their license prior to Wednesday when we turned it on, customers can still go into their purchase history, and any license that they've already bought is actually available as a PDF for download. So if you go in on your mobile device and you log into your account, and then you just download those, the PDFs of whichever license that you've already purchased, you can just save that right on your phone. You can save it as an image. You can, if you're on your computer at home, you can download and email it to yourself. You can print it on white paper if you want to and have, an extra copy along. So it's providing hunters with a lot of flexibility as it relates to, having their license on them. So the only thing, the big thing that is, we really need to make hunters understand is the carcass tags are not available electronically. So at no point will a carcass tag be available in the purchase history for download, for reprint, or any of those things. The one other piece is if you buy your license anytime after we turned it on Wednesday, you'll get an email. If you have an email address on file with us, you'll get a PDF version of that license emailed to you. But again, like I said, everything except for the carcass tags. So in the press release that's going out on Monday, we were careful to make sure that people understood that they need to, we want to caution them about buying their license at the last minute if they plan to go big game hunting, because they still will have to either wait for their carcass tags to arrive in the mail, or if they go to a licensing agent, then of course they'll get printed out for them right there. So that's kind of, that's one of the big things we really wanted to get done in the system, so we're glad to get that one crossed off the list.
Can I,
yes.
just while you're on that subject,
Sure.
because you said something that made my ears perk up. So there's the ability to download the license and print it off.
Yes.
Is that something that's going to be legal in the field?
Yes. We made sure we accounted for that when we did the reg changes.
Because I'm just seeing the problematic issue of multiple licenses. You know what I mean?
You're correct, Commissioner. We're addressing that. That's fine. The thing that we're concerned about is the carcass tags. We want to make sure they don't have multiple sets of carcass tags.
Right. Yeah, I get that. I mean, I know the carcass tag is one that it is what it is. It's going to be the green one now, right? So that's not an issue. But just the general hunting license, for whatever, you can, because you can do that with like pheasant stamp as well.
Shooting range permit, yeah, there are several you're allowed to, you were previously allowed to do that
Right.
with, yes.
That's all right. I mean, I'm sure, I just wanted to hear what you were thinking. You guys should all move up a little bit so we can hear you talk. I'm sorry, go ahead. Thanks, Deanna.
Okay, you know, when antlerless licenses went on sale in July, we did have a few challenges there. I'm sure everybody heard about some of those things. We did have some performance issues in the system. There was some slowness that the county treasurers were experiencing, which we tried to get on immediately with the vendor to try to make improvements there, and I'll talk about that a little later. It's interesting, we are seeing some slightly different buying patterns based on the new policy, and I think also the concurrent seasons, you know, for all the units this year, because if you look at what the availability for wildlife management unit quotas now as compared to what they were last year, we're seeing some differences, and I think that relates a little bit to the new personal limit that we put in place. So the over-the-counter round begins September 13th, which is this coming Monday, where that's where at that point, hunters will be allowed to buy up to 6 antlerless licenses. So in the past, in those special reg wildlife management units, people would have already been able to buy unlimited amounts of licenses in those areas. So those WMUs still have available quota. So the dynamic is going to be interesting to see, especially after Monday when over-the-counter begins. You know, we'll see a lot of those other ones sell out probably rather quickly. So we're kind of anxious to see where we are with that. And we are down, and we're down about 5% right now with antlerless sales, but I do think it's attributed to the fact that we haven't sold all those unlimited amounts in those special reg areas. So we'll kind of see how that rolls. The one other thing that we noticed right away, as soon as WMU started selling out, we had a little issue that we have been on top of since we noticed it, but there were about 12 wildlife management units that did have an overage in sales, meaning, like, let's say if the quota was 23,000 for a wildlife management unit, the system allowed about a 1% overage in sales to happen. It was a strange problem to have, and quite honestly, it took the vendor a couple of weeks to figure out what was actually allowing that to happen. But with a release that went into the system last week, we were able to correct that issue. So the summation of that basically is that we had 10 wildlife management units that had about a 1% overage in sales, 1 unit that went over by 2%, and 1 unit that went over by 3%. So overall, it's not a major concern by the biologists. We did talk to them extensively about it, and like I said, we've been monitoring it closely. But at this point, we feel certain that we've gotten the issue corrected, and you know, we would have liked to have gotten it corrected sooner, but you know, working with the vendors been a little bit challenging at times, and getting them to provide the resources necessary in all the areas where we're trying to make improvements. So we feel, like I said, we feel confident that we're in a better place with that now. You know, another area is the merchandise, and this was a little bit of a disappointment, I think, to us and maybe some of the customers that like to purchase merchandise with us. I think everybody at this point is so used to the Amazon experience and that wonderful online buying experience, because everybody's buying online these days. And this license sales system, selling merchandise really wasn't the focus. Obviously, selling licenses is the focus. So although we would really love for that whole merchandise area of the website to be better, it's been a little bit lower on the priority list, unfortunately. But we do have some goals in mind, some target dates, you know, just some of the things that we're hearing from customers that they don't like about that whole merchandise section is, you know, the product images could be better, so that some of those changes are targeted for November of this year. And the way that the catalog categorizes things, we're looking at February. And then we also sorely need an area of guest checkout. We need people to be able to go to the site, be able to browse our merchandise. If they see something, they should be able to buy it and not have to create a customer profile. And the ability now is that they have to create a limited customer profile. So it's not a terrible experience, but it is an area that we're getting some complaints on. So just wanted to let you know that hopefully by spring of next year, we'll have a lot of those issues ironed out. Because, you know, that branding of our agency is kind of an important area for us, and we have a lot of cool things for sale, and we want them to, you know, we want people to be able to easily buy those things. And sales have been up. I mean, we have sold more merchandise through the new site, even though it is a little cumbersome. Just a couple of the other things. The system performance has been an issue. And what I mean by that is just slowness of the system. So if anybody's used the system, depending on if you're in during a time, a peak time when there's a lot of users, we've definitely noticed some slow loading of pages and things like that. So NIC has assured us that they've added more resources to you know, get through those issues, and they have targeted some of those incremental improvements to happen through December of this year. So, I mean, we keep seeing slight incremental, like as they kind of attack it on a page-by-page basis. So, and they tell us it's a coding issue, and so they're just basically making some of the code behind the pages more efficient is what's happening. So we're just doing that incrementally. So hopefully we'll see some improvements there. The mobile app, you know, I'm a little disappointed we haven't gotten the changes done in the mobile app. That's of course another vendor that wrote our mobile app. And so they have to work closely with NIC to get the connection made. But the changes we're expected to have for the mobile app would be that if you've downloaded the app, you would be able to sign into your account through the app and then be able to download your licenses directly into the app. Because we feel like that's a much more convenient way for the customer to be able to store their licenses on their mobile device, because, you know, you can download a document on your phone or you can take a screenshot of it, but then, you know, months later when you're trying to find that file, sometimes it's a little bit, you know, it's not easy. So having it all right there in the mobile app is what we're looking to do. So hopefully we're targeting hunting season for that, you know, November, December timeframe. So we're trying to keep them on their toes to get some of these high-profile things done that we definitely need for our customers. Let's see. One of the things that we're missing in the new system that we had in the old system is the ability to purchase on behalf of another customer. Meaning, if as a parent you want to be able to go in online and buy your license and then go ahead and get the licenses for your children or your wife or your husband or whatever. And right now you have to create, you know, you have to go in every time, like, as that person and check out, you know, with each individual person, and it's timely, but it is functionality we had in the old system, and NIC knows that that is functionality that they do have to provide. So we do not have a date. We do not, I don't think, no. I think the goal is for next license year to have that in place. They tell us that that's a large-scale effort on their part to get that, but it hasn't fallen off our list. We definitely, you know, will make them do that. And of course, the last but not least, oh no, I have two more things. The one thing is printing printing and fulfillment. They kind of go hand in hand a little bit. Some of the vendors have been having issues with their printers and printing good quality licenses. I know that we've already seen, you know, some officers sending in some pictures of licenses that just, like, the print isn't it's not very bold, you know, it's just kind of light, it's sketchy, it's not good quality print. So we've been complaining about that, and it's an overall process that they need to address, and that's a big one too. I'm not sure when we'll get that one. And then fulfillment, and I think probably everybody in this room has heard some of the nightmares that we've been dealing with fulfillment. And what I mean by that is when you buy online, the NIC vendor has a subcontractor that they have in place to actually print all those online licenses that are sold each day and then mail them out to the customers. So there's been some great delays in some of those processes. The USPS has not been, you know, of course there's issues there too that we've run into, but NIC has recently made a trip to that vendor location. The fulfillment vendor's located in Colorado. So they went there, I think 3 weeks ago, and identified, you know, definitely areas for improvement, and we're trying to stay on top of that to continue making improvements there. So, I mean, that's pretty much what I had for there. We do have a roadmap in place to get through all these things. Right now, it's very heavy on the game side because we have, you know, we're in the middle of our peak. We have hunting seasons coming up. So NIC is very focused on game, but, you know, that tide's going to turn soon as the Fish Commission gets into their peak seasons, and they've got their own list of issues as well. So, you know, we're trying to get as much done before Fish gets into their beginning of their new license year sales. Along with, we have, you know, a lot of just overall user interface improvements that we want to make to the system. So you'll see a little bit of changes there coming. You know, if you've used the system, you'll know what I mean by multiple clicks through multiple pages till you ever even get to the catalog. So we're looking at consolidating some of those pages to just, you know, do a better overall user experience. So there's a lot of stuff coming, and it's, you know, we're not letting up, and yeah, so hopefully my next report will be, you know, more on the positive side than on the negative side. But we're getting there, and, you know, I still hear a lot of great comments. There's a lot of people that say, oh, I went in and bought my license, it was great, I don't see any problems. But, you know, we've had, you know, we've definitely had our share of issues and challenges, but we're working through them. So, does anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. On Monday, people can go in and buy over-the-counter unsold handlers tags. However, some of the county treasurers will not allow for over-the-counter sales. Is there a way online that you can tell who will and who will not sell over-the-counter?
Well, it's an interesting question, and you know, I was just talking to Tammy Klinger, the head of the license department, about this last week, and she sent a communication out to the county treasurers and specifically asking them which ones plan to be closed, and they are not willing to share that information. So we do not know. I mean, we've heard through the grapevine that a couple of them are not open to the public, but we don't know for sure, and without 100% verification from them, we really don't. You know, we can't, you know, post anything online. So, you know, no. Yeah.
Really, that's pretty unacceptable. But,
yeah. And I haven't talked to Tammy in the last 2 days. I mean, if she's gotten other information since then, you know, I don't know, but yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Let me know if you have any other questions later.
Okay, thank you, Diane. All right, next we have Andrew DeSalvo.
Hi, everyone. I think you've all met me, but just to introduce myself again, I'm Andrew DeSalvo. I'm the wildlife vet with the Bureau of Wildlife Management. And it's nice seeing you all. I feel like we're on a school field trip, spending all day together. I am here to talk about rabbit hemorrhagic disease. Many of you may have seen it in the news. It popped up right about the same time the pandemic hit us, and so it might have been buried in some papers, but it's a pretty serious issue. So serious that we thought it was worthwhile pursuing a disease response plan specifically for this agent. And so I'll give a bit of an overview of the disease, how it could potentially impact Pennsylvania, and some management strategies we could pursue. I worked on this very closely with our game management division, specifically Emily Boyd, the small game biologist, as well as others in that division, as well as received input from the Wildlife Futures Program, and to a lesser degree, the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. This was somewhat new territory for us. A lot of states have been impacted by this disease in a short amount of time, only about a year and a half. Not a single one of them has a disease response plan for this disease. It is actually, and I'll touch on this in a little bit, considered a foreign animal disease by USDA standards. Even they do not have a specific disease response plan for this disease when they do have it for African swine fever and foot and mouth disease and some other foreign animal diseases. So kind of new territory, but I definitely want to thank, I was one of the individuals, but I didn't do the brunt of the work on the CWD response plan. We really used that as a foundation on which we could do any wildlife disease response plan. So you'll notice some similarities in terms of the way it's structured. That's pretty much where the similarities end. These are two very unique diseases that share no real similarities. So just briefly, brief overview about Pennsylvania lagomorphs. So Pennsylvania is home to 3 wild lagomorph species that are native to North America. So we have the eastern cottontail, Appalachian cottontail, and the snowshoe hare. As you all know, you've probably seen in your backyards, the eastern cottontail is abundant throughout the Commonwealth. Appalachian cottontail is actually listed, according to the 2015 to 2025 Pennsylvania Wildlife Action Plan, as a regional species of greatest conservation need. The snowshoe hare used to have that designation as well. It was recently removed in this latest iteration of that plan. However, some recent research is saying that perhaps it was done prematurely, and so it very well may be that the next time this Wildlife Action Plan comes out, we will return to having 2 of our 3 native lagomorph species listed as species of greatest conservation need. We have a lot of research going on. There's a lot that we don't know about Pennsylvania lagomorphs, so we have a lot of research going on right now to try and determine their connectivity across the landscape between these species, as well as their relative abundance. So there's a lot of questions that remain regarding that. I will jump between using terminology like wild rabbits and domestic rabbits. One thing to keep in mind is that all domestic rabbits in the United States, as well as across the world, are of European origin. This disease is unique in that it can be caused by multiple viruses, and European rabbits have been affected for a few more decades earlier than this virus that's affecting Pennsylvania lagomorphs and other North American lagomorphs. So that distinction actually is pretty important. In terms of the role lagomorphs play, and when I say lagomorphs, I mean rabbits and hares, in the environment, it's a very important role, right? They're herbivorous consumers of plants, so they can, to some degree, control invasive plants, but they're also a food source, obviously, for carnivorous birds and mammals. And so, even though they're prolific breeders, and they generally can recover well from disease outbreaks, a short-term disruption in their population could have really devastating impacts on ecosystem balance. So very briefly on the disease, don't want to bore you too much. RHD is caused by non-enveloped single-stranded RNA caliciviruses, and the 3 pathogenic groups are the classic RHDV or RHDVA, RHDV1, that stands for rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus 1, which is a subgroup of classical RHDV, and the one that we're going to talk about today, which is RHDV2. That is a unique serotype or type of this calicivirus that can cause this disease in lagomorphs. It was first documented in Europe and France in 2010. It has been previously detected in the United States. It can infect both domestic and wild lagomorphs. So those previous detections in the US in 2018 in Ohio in a domestic rabbit, 2019 in a feral rabbit population out in Washington State, So those were, again, escaped domestics. And then in 2020, in New York, again, just domestics. So up until very early 2020, it had never touched any native North American wild lagomorph species. It has a variety of transmission routes. So it can be spread from animal to animal directly, through aerosols, through fomites. So someone could potentially track the virus on boots or equipment or tools. It can get shed in secretions and excretions, right? So respiratory droplets, as I mentioned, as well as feces and urine. And it can persist. It's highly contagious, and it can persist for a while. So for just some examples, it can stay virulent in a fly for up to 9 days, for a few months on the landscape. And so it's a challenging disease to manage because we all know rabbits are very social creatures, hares are very social creatures, and something that's going to persist in the environment for a long time, how do you get out ahead of that? So it's very, very challenging. It has a short incubation period, right? So when I think of a disease that you're all very familiar with, CWD, super long incubation period, right? Some deer can be exposed and take 2 years to develop actual illness. In this case, days. Exposure, usually no more than 5 days, that rabbit is either dead or showing some of the clinical signs that are seen in infection. Infection often kills. The mortality rate really varies, but in some cases it can actually exceed 70%. It's not always fatal, like some diseases like CWD and other diseases, but very, very high mortality rate. Vaccination is a question that you might receive from members of the public because there are vaccines available. There are 2 from Europe. They're modified live vaccines that are not licensed to be used in the United States. There's a lot of risks with using modified live vaccines in general. One of the biggest is reversion to virulence. So it's modified, it could potentially revert back to a pathogenic state and wipe out the animals that you're trying to vaccinate against disease. So it's pretty risky to use, and that's one of the reasons why it's not approved for use in the US. But it really, and anytime you're talking about vaccinating wildlife, it is so challenging to do it. It's very challenging to target the specific species you want to consume that vaccine, and then how would you deliver it to such a abundant species like the eastern cottontail, for example? It would be very, very challenging. So it's not very practical. So I have seen it. They've pursued it out in California with riparian brush rabbits. It's a very small subpopulation that they can very much control, and they have to trap them, give injections, and then do follow-up trappings and follow-up injection booster shots. So that's the exception. In most every other situation, vaccination is not even a viable option, but I did want to mention that. I already mentioned before that it's a foreign animal disease by USDA standards. That just means that it's a highly contagious, a disease that can cause high mortality and huge economic ramifications. So Pennsylvania actually is one of the higher of the states in terms of their rabbit production, and so this, while it wouldn't necessarily impact it to the degree that a livestock disease could, like foot and mouth disease, there are certain considerations that we want to keep in mind in terms of the impact it can have in the agriculture industry. It's not zoonotic. That's a great thing, right? So we don't have to worry about people getting sick, and it's also specific to just lagomorphs. So hunting dogs can't get sick from it. Other animals cannot get sick from it. Current outbreak, southwestern United States. USDA is tracking the current outbreak. It's been happening in both wild and domestic rabbits. First popping up in March 2020 in Mexico, New Mexico, and Arizona. And since spreading, it's probably a combination here of natural spread across the landscape as well as human-driven spread of that disease. And then I did want to point out that there are a couple of dots out there on the East Coast. And we'll touch on this a little bit in the future, but those detections in Georgia and Florida are not in wild populations, they're in domestics, but they're the exact same strain that's circulating in the southwestern United States. So what does that prove? Someone picked it up out there, either on their boots or equipment, and brought it back or transported a rabbit that was originated from there, brought it back to the East Coast. So it really highlights the challenges that you face with the ease of travel to potentially spread a disease like this. So for our response plan, when we had these early discussions, we kind of set ourselves up for 3 goals. And they're very much reflective of the stages in which you respond to a disease that is not yet here in Pennsylvania. So the first is to minimize the risk of disease introduction to Pennsylvania's native wild rabbit and hare populations. Second is to minimize the effects of the disease on Pennsylvania's native wild rabbit and hare populations. And the third is to increase stakeholder understanding of, support for, and participation in RHD management efforts. That is something we're always keeping in mind. So without that public support, we're not going to get very far. So in terms of some of the objectives within that first management goal, one is to prevent human-caused introductions of RHD into native wild lagomorph populations. And this involves pursuing executive orders and working with the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture to mitigate disease spillover risk from domestics. And as many of you are familiar, we had to pursue regulatory changes that you guys voted on back in January to provide Brian the executive authority to address non-CWD wildlife diseases. So that kind of had to be pursued before we went forward with this response plan, because otherwise our hands would have been tied and we wouldn't have had the regulatory authority backing up some of the management strategies that we want to institute. And then the second objective would be to rapidly investigate suspect RHD cases. So we want to, get out there and take care of these before those sick or dead animals are seeding the environment with virus that's going to persist for months on end. And when I say suspect RHD cases, that's basically going to be a presentation of multiple dead rabbits or hares with no obvious cause of death in the same relative location over a short period of time. That FAD status complicates investigations to a tiny degree, in that because of that status, USDA actually has to take the lead on investigating suspect cases until the disease becomes endemic in an area, and then USDA is fine passing that responsibility of response off to the state ag and state wildlife agencies. So we will be working very closely with them. USDA has foreign animal disease investigators within the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, and we already have, over the past 18 months, investigated some suspect cases. It goes very well, very good communication, and so we will continue to have to do that. As I mentioned already, in July, so just a couple of months ago, we issued an executive order banning the importation of high-risk parts from high-risk areas. And high-risk parts for this disease, unfortunately, are basically the entire animal. The virus can be found in any tissue within that animal, so it's not like a disease like CWD, where you see it in significantly higher prevalence in certain tissue types. And then high-risk areas we defined as any Commonwealth, state, territory, or country where RHDV2 has been detected in wild or domestic lagomorph populations in the 12 months prior to when you want to do the importation. And I will say that we can only address wild lagomorphs. What's going on the domestic side of things? Well, we mirrored this language off of a quarantine order that the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture put together. They already had regulations in place, and they actually issued that in September of last year. They renewed it in January. And we've been working very closely with them to try and attack, burn the candle at both ends and make sure we get out ahead of this, because either of us could potentially cause an outbreak in the either wild or domestic rabbits and hares that we're responsible for. So it really involves closely working together. That second goal, to mitigate the impact, our objective is basically to determine the scale, scope, and limit the potential disease spread following an RHDV2 detection. And that brings me to probably one of your most favorite acronyms, which are DMAs. So we have now RHD-DMAs that will be created when you have that initial detection. So following an initial RHDV2 detection in Pennsylvania or within 10 miles of the Pennsylvania border, that RHD-DMA will be created. The radius can extend up to 10 miles. It's not going to be a solid number like we use for CWD. And why the flexibility? Well, this disease impacts multiple species, right? So we can't just look at one species and say, hey, what's your dispersal rates? Give me a hard, solid number that we can't deviate from. We have hares, and research has shown that hares can have dispersal distances in excess of 10 miles in rare cases. Then we have eastern cottontails, who have dispersal rates that are usually less than 3 miles. Then we might have detections in domestic animals. And if it's happening in a domestic rabbit in a very biosecure facility, I would argue that you have a much smaller radius for your RHD-DMA around that detection than a domestic rabbit that came back positive that was in someone's backyard hutch that could potentially go face-to-face with a wild eastern cottontail. So it's good to have that flexibility, I think. Also, and this is a draft of high-risk areas that Emily's been working on with some folks in GIS, and in addition to the flexibility needed for species variation and dispersal, there also could be populations that we're pretty sure are very isolated from one another. So we want to have that flexibility. Now, management strategies within those RHD-DMAs, increase surveillance, obviously, to determine that scale and scope, limiting the movement of high-risk parts. So much like we banned the importation of those high-risk parts into Pennsylvania, we might want to address that within the RHD-DMA as well to prevent it from spilling out of the DMA into other areas of the Commonwealth. And amending permits is an option. So this was something that was brought forth in Section 137.34. I don't know exactly how it would potentially look, but I think the important thing to recognize is that there are quite a few special permit holders who could either help or harm the spread of this disease across the landscape. So those are permit holders like falconers, field dog trials, rabbit trapping, wildlife rehabilitators. So it's just something to keep in mind that those are going to be some stakeholders that we're going to have to do some very specific outreach to. And when I say amending permits, I simply mean that we could potentially modify existing permits, suspend existing permits, or decide to not issue additional permits if they're being requested in the face of an outbreak. And then the last goal, communications. We really want to foster two-way communication and utilize human dimension techniques to assess stakeholder values and opinions on Game Commission RHD management efforts. And so this is going to really require putting together a robust rabbit hemorrhagic disease communications plan. As you may have already gathered, in the field, management strategies are very much limited. And so timely, clear, and consistent communication will be essential to make sure that we are managing this disease if it arrives to the best of our ability. I have proposed that we kind of tackle this the same way as CWD in terms of having an interagency task force. I kind of informally already have one. Just I'm in communication with PDA a lot, but not so much with DCNR. And so I think it will be important to just make sure everyone's at the table and supplying input when needed. We also, of course, want to identify and address stakeholder interests, provide transparency, and then pursue educational outreach and marketing campaigns. And one thing I do want to point out is that I had mentioned before, no other state has pursued this, but we've shared this with other states. So I think the Game Commission as an agency is really taking the lead on this, and states like Maryland, Virginia, New Jersey, and New York, should they wish to pursue an RHD response plan of their own, are going to turn to what I think is a great start to a response plan to build out their own. So I think that's something that we should be very proud of, and I don't know if they'll pursue that, but it is something to keep in mind. So it's been a real great team effort. I haven't gotten feedback from them, but of course this will go out to public comment for feedback. And so I think this response plan, rather than not develop a response plan, right? It's like, why are you doing it if there's limited field strategies to pursue? I think we owe it to these species to protect them, and it's really an affirmation of our commitment to implement strategies to secure the long-term benefit and preservation of Pennsylvania's wild lagomorphs. And so I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have. I know I threw a lot at you just now.
And since the entire Lagomorph is contagious, why are you using the terminology of parts? The movement of high-risk parts. Why not just say the movement of any part or the movement of the rabbit period? It just seems somewhat confusing to me because right away I'm thinking, well, it's the brain, or what is it? Oh.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely some flexibility in that terminology, and to say that the virus is found in every tissue is true, but I would say things like hide have a much lower amount of viral.
You still don't want the hide moved. So why not just say the whole Lagomorph shouldn't be moved? I mean, it makes perfect sense, but.
Yeah, so when we defined, I don't know if that was a response to maybe following along the lines of what's been done with CWD to define high-risk parts.
Well, CWD makes perfect sense.
Yeah, yeah. The entire Lagomorph, I think realistically, I think in the field, if we have an outbreak, we're going to encourage people to dispose of carcasses properly. How are we going to enforce that? Because proper disposal of carcasses requires incineration or burying it 3 feet deep or getting it into commercial trash. We could potentially encourage hunters to field dress where they harvest it within the DMA, bag up that stuff and dispose of it when they get out of there, but folks are going to want to take meat home. They're going to want to take pelts home. And so I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could call it, the way we had the regulation defined was parts or products of any animal. So maybe that's why
I think it's confusing. I think you should just say the whole animal, but that's just my opinion.
Okay.
The second question, you said you're working with the PDA. Have they given, I'm sure they have, any thought to like canceling state fairs where they bring all these bunnies in and have them in cages with millions of other bunnies, that type of thing? I mean, that to me seems, I know when they had the avian flu outbreaks several years ago, they banned any displays of chicken at these fairs, wild chickens or domestic chickens.
Yeah, I don't know if they've had those discussions. I know their quarantine order, it's basically an import ban, same kind of language we use. So if folks are transporting rabbits into Pennsylvania for fairs, they can't come from areas where there's been detections in domestics. In terms of outright canceling those events, I don't know if they would go that far. I think one of the challenges is that rabbits are definitely not, I mean, to be blunt, they're not a priority for PDA. They're not inspected to the same degree as other domestic species are. And so there's voluntary inspections that rabbit slaughter facilities can abide by, voluntary, through USDA or PDA. They're not required to. So they do have authority over domestic rabbits, but they tend to, I think, historically have taken a more gentle approach rather than a strong-handed approach into managing that. So I'd have to ask Dr. Brightbill and Dr. Hamburg if that's something that they are considering. So, yeah, it's a little scary. There's some aspects of this when I was putting it together that may come across as a bit defeatist, but it's so hard to control people travel. You can encourage people to decontaminate equipment when they're in areas, if they're out hunting jackrabbits out west and they come back. But things can slip through the cracks. And so when it does get here, if it is going to get here, and we've already seen a few detections in the East Coast and domestics, you really kind of transition almost into a containment strategy, which is not the way you typically want to deal with wildlife health or wildlife disease outbreaks, but it's very, very hard. You can't eradicate it once it gets into a wild population. A closed herd of domestics, you basically can wipe them out, decontaminate the facility, and you start over from scratch. You can vaccinate them because they're in captivity. Can't do that in the wild. So it's super challenging.
How do I know my rabbit has RHD?
So what diagnostics are pursued, or just from closely looking at it?
You said that you're going to encourage people to leave their carcass in the field or get rid of it in a proper manner. I go out and harvest a rabbit. What am I looking for?
So that encouragement will, at the moment, we're only considering giving that encouragement if an RHD-DMA is created within the RHD-DMA.
Within the,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
The signs are really atypical, and they're not pathognomonic for the disease, like lethargy, respiratory distress. You can sometimes see blood coming from the nares, the nose, or the mouth, but a lot of times that acute infection isn't super obvious. So I think, we're going to be encouraging people to report to us when they find those multiple dead at the same time, because it's going to be very obvious, I think, if we get it in wild. I mean,
It'll be more obvious that we have it in an area.
yeah,
It's not gonna be so obvious that I have it in my rabbit.
no.
So, what are the risks of consumption to a human?
Oh, there's no zoonotic potential whatsoever. Yeah, so no worries in terms of consumption. I would say we would have to strongly encourage people to not move rabbits or their parts outside of RHD-DMAs.
Right.
But if you do it responsibly, and you keep that tissue within your household, what are the chances of that getting exposed to a domestic rabbit or to another wild rabbit? Very low. But a hunter who's hunting rabbits, who has rabbits at home, they should think twice about bringing that stuff home, because it's going to be very hard to ensure that all the virus has been cleaned and all your equipment's been decontaminated. So.
Good.
All right.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew Ward?
Hello, everybody. My name is Andrew Ward. I'm the quail biologist here at the Game Commission. At our last commission meeting, I presented to you our northern bobwhite quail management plan for Pennsylvania from 2021 to 2023. Since that time, we posted our plan online and allowed a 30-day public comment period. It was posted in the news release just prior to that meeting, as well as another specific news release in the middle of that comment period as a reminder. So today I'm here to talk to you about and give you a brief overview of our public comments on the Northern Bobwhite Management Plan. So we had overwhelmingly positive response. 71% of our 31 public comments were supportive of the plan. That 29% that was critical of the plan can be summarized as a misallocation of funds and it's not going to work, but most of our comments were supportive. A number of them just either showed their support or lack thereof, but many of them also went into more detail, into suggestions on how to benefit the plan. So I'll give you a brief overview of that. It broke down into a couple different categories, so I'll go over it more as an overview of those categories. The first of which was that additional practices are required for managing bobwhite, and the first being predator management. So there are questions as to the efficacy of this project and whether or not we'll be managing predators on the site. And that's something that we're exploring in more of a direct trapping sense, but we're certainly focused on predator management through habitat management, which can be a very useful tool in mitigating those risks. The next being the suspending hunting on the site and around the site, which is an interesting thought because we're taking all this time and effort to translocate these wild birds from one area of their current range to our state to be able to repopulate. So that's something that we'll recommend, is to suspend hunting on the site to allow those translocated birds that we're actively bringing in the opportunity to establish themselves on the site. Next being, we had comments from private landowners showing support and basically asking how they can help. And that's going to be part of our plan later on throughout. We're using a survey and focus group to try and understand how these private landowners around the site are making their decisions so that later on we can try and bring them on board and in efforts to expand the project. Our next overarching theme was that the public supports management for native species. A number of our supportive comments really hammered home that they're excited about the project because northern bobwhite are a native species to Pennsylvania, and they were really excited about bringing them back. And then even some of our critical comments focused on the management of native species, species like our grouse and woodcock. And on our focus area, especially with woodcock, we have quantitative evidence that the management we're doing for bobwhite is supporting these other native species like woodcock, like some of our lagomorphs, as well as a number of other grassland, shrubland, and early successional species. So that was really encouraging and something that we're certainly focused on as well. And then the topic that was brought up the most throughout our comments was the management of habitat. The public really harped on the importance of habitat management when managing wildlife species, and we could not agree more with that. Specifically on our site, we've conducted some really intensive management. All three of these pictures here are of the same area, the furthest on the left being in 2018 prior to any management, the middle photo being after overstory removal and a prescribed fire, and then all the way on the right being in the growing season of that same site, looking a lot better, much more like that early successional grassland shrubland that we need for quail and those other species. So with that intensive management that we're doing now, we'll have plans throughout our management plan to continue that at a much less intensive level. It's much easier to maintain than it is to create. So another point that was a great point by the public that we agree with and focus on as well. So with that, I just want to thank all of you here that showed up today to listen to this talk, as well as all the members of the public that took the time out to read the management plan and submit comment for that. And with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to.
So Andrew, I'm just quickly looking through some of the comments, right?
Sure.
And there's one, and we got to make this perfectly clear, I believe. It says, if you believe you've ever become a sustainable, huntable game bird in Pennsylvania, you're sorely mistaken. That is not our goal. So that we need to make that clear, right? I mean,
yeah.
Would it be great? Absolutely, but that is not our goal moving forward. So you want to touch that real quick?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for bringing that up. We're trying to set goals that are realistic here. We set our bobwhite focus area in an area that can be successful. It has all the right things as far as an area of the state that has more mild winters. It has the habitat available there, as well as our great partnerships to provide the funding, manpower, and equipment to get it done. So to your point, would it be great? Yes, but that is certainly not our goal right now. You know, of course, things can be reassessed in the future, but right now that we're just trying to reestablish a native species in their historic range.
So we've laid a lot of groundwork working up to this point. So you're going to have to just remind me a couple things. One, we've stopped. We're not allowed to stock quail anymore. Hunters, they can release them. They can still release them. We've done that, so we can still hunt quail in areas. Okay.
Yeah, and that's just like a put and take operation at this point. Folks can put them out and hunt.
I don't remember what my next thought was, so I'll catch you some other time.
Absolutely. I'm always available.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So for reports and presentations. Yep. Executive section. we'll go to next.
Yes, senior staff and commissioners will meet across the hall, and the agenda or the board of commissioner meeting will start tomorrow at 8:30. Thank you. Thanks, Cal.